Okay, so today we're going to talk about how to combine 3D shapes together, how to make a process of loft using what's called guided loft curves, and a little more about our reference geometry, particularly points and axes. So when you have different 3D features that you want to make into the same part, we have two different options on how to do that. We can either merge the features or cut away the features. So if I want to merge them, they're going to both be solid objects, in which case I'll use my same 3D commands we already learned: extrude boss base, revolve boss base, sweep, or loft, or boundary boss base. We haven't done that one really. But if I want to cut away that extra feature, I can use these cut commands, which work the same way. They just remove something from a 3D part. So extrude, cut, revolve, cut, sweep, and loft, and boundary cut. We'll not be using the whole wizard right now. We will learn that later when we do screws and threads. But for right now, don't use the whole wizard from it. It's important to note that before we can use these commands, again, we've got to start with its individual sketches, 2D sketches. So each 3D feature has to be made by its own sketch. And these sketches can be drawn on different planes. Just remember to select the appropriate plane before you start drawing. So think about what feature you want to start drawing with and how to make it into 3D, what 3D command you're going to use, and then how to build it from there. Okay, so for the first component of my part or feature of my part, I need to think about what 3D operation am I going to use? Am I going to use extrude, revolve, loft? Based on that 3D operation, what sketch plane should I start on? And I should think about these before I start my sketch. When I'm in my sketch, remember, I probably want to start at the origin, unless I have some other reason not to, like some other point I know I want to start on. And my 2D sketches all need to be fully defined and constrained. So fully turned black, that little minus sign needs to go away. I need to stay fully defined in the bottom right-hand corner before I can move on to 3D. Again, this will save us a lot of headache if you do this first. Don't forget that what you're probably missing, if it's not fully defined, is where something is in space, a horizontal and a vertical distance, for example. Okay. Also, don't forget that you can use construction lines. They won't influence making the 3D features in your part, so use them as needed. We'll also talk about reference geometry. Okay, so if I want to merge two features, I can make something as a solid, like this rectangular prism I started with, and then make another sketch that was a rectangle here, and extrude it from there. So I could sketch on this plane and do that. But I want both of those features to be combined together into one solid part, then I want to use merge. So I select my general 3D command, like in this case, boss extrude. And when I've gotten that, to extrude this extra little rectangle, I want to make sure I click on this check mark that says merge results. Note I can't remove material with any of these boss extrude commands. To do that, I would need to select the button on 3D features that was their counterpart that said extrude a cut, revolve cut. All of these were cuts. All of these are solids or merges. So the cut ones, for example, extrude cut, like if I had this circle here and I then selected the 3D command extrude cut, I get options of how far I want to cut, like through all of my part, up to another vertex or surface, for example, going in different directions or a specific distance. Okay, specific distance would be using blind. So that's my options right now. Again, right now, if I wanted this whole as a circle kind of cut through, I'm not using whole wizard, I'm using actual extrude cut here. We'll learn whole wizard is a special command for when we're doing things like screws and bolts. Later on, we'll learn that. When we have these complex parts, it's important to note that sectioning view can be very useful. So this is my section view button. When I click on it, I can then drag in the direction of the arrow that shows up and see what's going on inside my part. When you click on the green check mark, it'll look like it's a solid part, but don't be scared. It did not actually cut your part permanently, anything like that. It's just to view it. It's only a view. If I re-click my section icon, it'll go away and look like my solid part that I had before. The other 3D command we'll learn today are guided loft curves. So normally when we loft, the default option is to loft from one sketch to another using straight lines to select between the sketches. But I can alternatively specify what are called guide curves or lines to specify how to connect from one sketch to another in my loft. So for example here, I had made a kind of ellipse shape back here, and then I made a point at this point, and I wanted to connect from this ellipse to this point. But normally that would connect just in straight lines, which would make this kind of look like a cone. And if I don't want them to connect in straight lines between those sketches, after I select what sketches or points that I'm lofting to, I can click on the button under what says Guide Curves and select sketches for the curves for how they connect. So I selected these ellipse lines here to do that. And we'll look at that in our example today. Also keep in mind, can be useful to you in our reference geometry. We talked about how to make reference planes before. We also can make reference points, like at centers of faces or arcs or projections from a plane to a point. That can be very useful. And then you can use those points even as like in your loft. Also reference axes, like through a cylindrical of a face or through a point somewhere off from a plane, and it would go through that plane as well. Quick snaps can also be useful in your command manager if you're not getting the points you wanted to select. Specifying that you want to snap to a center point or a quadrant snap can be useful. So, in SolidWorks, I'm going to show you how to make this part. This is a very rough version of a kind of orthotic. I expect yours will look very different and probably much better from that. But I just made some solid as a base, which I extruded up. There was this weird shape. I actually made that shape from my spline command. And then I had something that was kind of like my arch support here that I would need as a separate 3D feature. And I'm using that with a loft with guided loft curves. So it's kind of a weird curvy shape, and I'll show you how to do both of those now. So again, I start always with a new part file. And I start with a sketch. I'm going to sketch these. So I'm looking at my top plane, because I want to build up from the bottom to the top. And I'm going to use splines. Now, you may not be using splines. That may be more difficult for what you want. But splines are curves with tangent points. And I'm going to kind of rough draw them right now, and then show you one way to define them, because they're very difficult to define on your own. So if I select this spline command, I'm going to start at my origin, because again, I have no reason not to. And that helps at least a little bit. And here I am kind of making a random foot shape. Again, I'm not making this very realistic right now. You should have measurements of a whole bunch of points you want. So keep that in mind, that this is very iffy and you should be having a much more logical process than this. Need a closed 3D shape, and I hit escape. Splines are so difficult to dimension that I recommend using the option under display delete relations to fully define the sketch. Now, fully defined sketch works some of the time, works actually okay with splines. With a lot of other things, it won't work. You can try it, but A, it may define things that are distances you didn't want, and B, if you use fully defined sketch, a lot of the time it won't work and will tell you that it's over defined or constrained, or that it's still not fully defined after doing it. If you get any of those warnings that it's fully defined or constrained or turns yellow, that you want to undo or escape and undo that, because it's not what you want. But for me, if I say fully defined sketch and click on that green check mark, it actually does define it by giving it a whole bunch of dimensions to where all those points on my spline were. If I change one of the dimensions for that point, so like this was my vertical distance from my origin up to this top point, let's say that wasn't the distance I want, and I wanted it to be 6, for example. Then it moves that point, okay, while keeping all the rest of them. So it'll look kind of funky if you don't define them to be what you want them to, where those points should be first. I'm going to undo that. So Control Z to get back to my shape. Okay, that's my fully defined sketch. I no longer have any minus sign here. You might need to exit your sketch and re-enter if it's taking a while to load to see that. But I have a fully defined sketch. I can now go to my 3D commands and features. and say extrude. So I'm going to extrude this up some height. Let's make that a little thinner. Again, you should decide what height you want, like for your orthotic. Say okay. That makes sense. I'm now going to make the arch support here. Again, it probably should be on this side, but I'm drawing them different just to be weird right now. So to sketch now, it's going to be a different 3D feature because I can't use boss extrude for it or extend linearly. I need to make a new sketch. So I'm going to sketch. Now on this plane or this top surface, instead of my bottom plane, I can select it just like any other plane and start sketching here. I'm going to start sketching with an ellipse that starts on this edge and goes some distance and over. And I'm going to smart dimension my ellipse. So from here, oops, to here, need to be some distance. If you don't like that you're in an angled view from this, you can always from your feature manager select that arrow down, find the sketch you're in, get out of smart dimension, find the sketch you're in, right click on it. Oh, goodness, I'm not having good luck with that today. Sketch you're in, right click on it and say normal to. Now I'm looking straight onto that sketch. So that dimension my major axis of my ellipse. I need to dimension my minor axis, for example. So you might have ellipses or curves in your design as well. And it also needs to know where is this point from the origin. Okay. Once it got that, I was actually fully defined because it knew something else about that point y distance-wise. You may have needed a y distance as well, but if I try that with mine, it will probably tell me that this is overdefined. You always want to say cancel if that happens, not accept that. Okay. Now, I only wanted this kind of half of the ellipse up to where this shape was cutting off. But I don't have this shape as a sketch anymore. It's not part of it. See how these are thick black lines and these are thin? To make this shape into a sketch on my plane, I can use convert entities. So if I say convert entities and I click on this sketch, see how it makes this nice solid dark line for the edge of that sketch? That's now a sketch line I can select and use. So now I can trim this. So trim. And when I trim that away, now it turns thin, except I still got a thick black line here. And I want to trim away my ellipse. And now this is my shape. Okay, so this becomes my whole sketch in here. And I should be good to go. Now, if I click on my scroll bar and look at this, I can see my sketch is made on the top here. I need some other sketch, or at least a point. You might have a sketch that's a circle or something, other shape, that I'm going to loft to for this. So I'm going to go back to my features, and for me, I'm going to make a new plane, reference plane, based on, click this drop-down menu, my right plane, but through this point. See how it makes a new plane there? And accept that, and then start sketching here. On that plane, I'm going to make a line that goes from there, and I want that line to go straight up, but I'm having a really hard time seeing that because I'm not normal to my sketch. Right click, be normal to. So now, looking at it on this plane, I want to go from where that point is straight up 90 degrees, and I need to give it a distance. Again, you should be specifying your distances correctly for whatever height you want. Now I can exit the sketch. Again, all of my sketches are fully defined. There's no minus sign in front of them. I want to check that. I can now see I got this line, this guy here. Ooh, that's a pretty high one. If I want to change it, right click and say edit. Let's change that distance. View normal to it so I can see that. Let's make that something smaller. That looks better. Okay, now I can exit my sketch. and say I have this. I want to loft, I'm going to loft just to a point up here. You could loft to a totally different sketch, offset from this plane up here, to a different shape, and I'm going to loft to a point. So I'm going to say reference geometry point, so I can have an actual point to select. And I want to select the actual point. See, on point. There we go. Looking at it this way, I can actually select that point. Sometime you gotta change your view. Okay, so now I have a reference point there I can select when I go to my loft. So now I'm going to loft from what? So sketch 2 was this shape. I want to go from there to my point. Now see, it's going to default do that in lines, and maybe that's okay for you. If you're okay with that, that's fine. If you don't like that angle for that curve, I can specify guide curves. So I'm not going to accept that loft for right now. I'm going to do it based on guide curves. To make a guide curve, I've got to make a separate sketch on a plane that goes from my first sketch for my loft to my second sketch, or in my case, my point. So I'm going to make a new plane based on, it already had that point selected, based on that point, and that one. 3 points can also define a plane. That's going to be my new reference plane. And on that plane, I'm going to sketch. So I'm going to say sketch, guesses that I'm under that plane. And again, view normal to it so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to make an arc here, a 3-point arc that starts on that point and ends on that point. And then I'm going to decide how curvy do I want that to be in between there. So I'm going to make mine pretty curvy. Okay. See that? There we go. That is going to be used as one of my guide curves. So now I'm going to specify when I make this loft that this curve and this line, I made this as well to go straight up, are going to define how my shape lofts from one sketch to the other, or from one sketch to a point in this case. So I go to features and say loft. Now, it already guesses that was a guide curve, but I'm going to pretend that wasn't there and just delete it. I need to select my profiles for my sketches first. So I'm going from what profile to another. Sketch 2 to, oops, let's try selecting my point itself. Sketch 2 to my point. Again, do you see how its default shape goes in a straight line from there? And if that's not the shape I want it to follow this curve. So to make it follow this curve, I go to Guide Curves and select that curve there. Now, it's going to guessing that it wants to curve in on this side here as well, which is annoying. See how it curved in that preview? I can specify multiple guide curves. So if I select that sketch that was that vertical line, now it goes based on both of them. Now I've got a vertical line up from my center point and there. And that's my weird curvy shape using guide curves. Okay, all done. Here's my 3D shape. Now, when I make that loft, I forgot to say that, you can go back in and say Edit Feature. Since I already had a 3D shape, and this one, I had to select Merge Result to make sure they're both solid. That's normally the default, but you do want to make sure that is selected. You want them together. Now, let's pretend I had wanted to cut away something from this. Again, that looks kind of funny. You could specify extra curves. I can make curves here and here as well as what I wanted. All up to what you want to do for your shapes. Let's pretend I wanted to sketch. And again, I'm going to then sketch on this plane. Sketch. And I'm going to make a circle here. And I'm going to dimension that circle. And I'm also going to dimension where that circle is compared to my origin. Oops, I exited my sketch, I didn't want to. Go back into my sketch. I'm going to look at it normal so I can see things nicely. And say smart dimension from here to my origin vertically, and from here to my origin horizontally. Okay, I then exit my sketch. If I want, let's say I wanted this to be cut away from it, I then go to extrude cut. I select my sketch, or I could select it from my feature manager, and I can either say blind for a certain distance. So I'm going to do that now. Let's say it's only going to be 0.15 here, or I could select things like through all, which would go all the way through my part. So if I say blind in that distance, what did that do? Well, it cut through a little bit. I can use my section view, however, to look through and see how far. So see, it didn't cut all the way through. I can tell what I have there by sectioning. Now, if I freak out and I save my section view like this, I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened to the rest of my part? All I have to do is undo section view, and it comes back. So there's my 3D feature. Hope that helps with making some weird shapes, some curvy shapes. Play around and get creative, guys.